Just to let you know, Cole and I record these podcasts in the mornings. We've learned through trial and error rather than through deliberate planning that mornings are better. We make fewer mistakes. We stay on track more consistently. We are, in short, more professionally competent at 10 in the morning than we are at 2 in the afternoon. Last week, we broke our own rule and recorded a session at, guess what, 2 o'clock. And 3 things happened. First, we made more mistakes, more stumbles, more retakes, more moments of losing the thread. Second, when we made those mistakes, we found them funnier than we would have at 10 in the morning. The same level of flub that would have produced a brief pause and professional reset in the morning produced at 2 in the afternoon genuine laughter. And third, and this is the one that sent me to the research, when one of us laughed, the other caught it immediately. Not after a moment, but immediately. The laughter was contagious in a way that felt qualitatively different from what happens in our morning sessions. I want to tell you why all 3 of those things happened. And I want to tell you that they are not 3 separate observations. They're one observation about what the brain does at 2 in the afternoon that it doesn't do quite as much at 10 in the morning. It turns out that understanding that single underlying mechanism opens up one of the most important and least discussion dimensions of human social life. The fact that we're constantly catching things from each other. Laughter, yawning, anxiety, optimism, panic, enthusiasm. Whether we intend to or not, whether we're aware of it or not, and whether the people around us know they're transmitting anything at all.
Welcome to my BrainWise coach. I'm Cole Bastian.
And I'm Phil Dixon.
And today we're on Contagion, and not the viral kind. We're talking about 3 things you catch from other people without meaning to: laughter, yawns, moods, anxiety, energy. We'll start with why the early afternoon is the contagion hour, get into what the research actually shows about laughter and yawning, look at the version that quietly runs your whole organization, and finish with who catches what and what to do about it. If this show helps you think differently about how your brain works, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, and comment, share, and subscribe on all of our social platforms. You can find us everywhere at My BrainWise Coach.
Hopefully this is a warmer, more playful episode than usual, which this subject earns. The research is genuinely funny in places. It's also precise, and we will keep the precision underneath that lightness.
So let's start with the afternoon, because I want the mechanism before perhaps the contagion research. You're saying these things are actually connected.
They're directly connected, and the mechanism is the circadian system. The brain follows a roughly 24-hour cycle of alertness governed by the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus, the brain's master clock. Within that cycle, there's a well-documented 12-hour harmonic, a secondary trough in alertness in the early afternoon, typically between 2 and 4, regardless of whether the person's eaten lunch. It's sometimes called the post-lunch dip, but that name is misleading because the dip occurs even in people who haven't eaten. It's not the food, it's the clock.
And what specifically is dipping?
Well, our attention dips and our working memory dip. And what's mostly relevant for what happened in our session, inhibitory control dips. The prefrontal cortex, which monitors and regulates our responses, catches the mistake before it's made, applies the brake before the impulse fires, is running at reduced capacity during that trough. Vehicle accidents caused by sleepiness peak between 2 and 6 in the morning, but also notably between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Same mechanism. The circadian system pulls the alertness floor down, and the prefrontal cortex, which is the most energy demanding thing to maintain, is the first to soften and go away.
So the mistakes at 2 o'clock are just the error detection running through slightly less precision, not incapacity, a modest reduction in the control that catches the fumble before it becomes a stumble. In a broad presentation, that matters enormously. Between 2 people who know each other well in a low-stakes creative context, it produces something different, mistakes that are actually funny. And the reason they're funny is the same reason that they happened. The prefrontal cortex that would have caught the error is the same structure that would have suppressed the reaction to it.
That's exactly right. The brake that would have kept the mistake from happening is the same brake would have kept the laughter from spreading. And when both are softened at once, the social, playful, emotionally contagious brain that lives below the prefrontal cortex gets more room to operate, which is why the third observation follows from the first two. The contagion was faster and more complete because the prefrontal cortex role in moderating social responses, including the automatic tendency to mirror the emotional expression of the person you're with, was running softer than it does at 10 in the morning. The same mechanism that makes you more likely to cry at a film when you're tired makes laughter more contagious in the afternoon trough. The social brain gets more room, and it turns out to be a very effective transmitter.
So let's talk about laughter specifically, because it's badly underrated as a neuroscience subject.
Significantly underrated, and personally speaking, one of my favorite topics. Robert Provine, who spent more time studying laughter than almost anyone, established one finding that reframes the whole subject. Laughter is about 30 times more frequent in social situations than in solitary ones. 30 times. You virtually never laugh alone. I often laughed at my own jokes, but that's beside the point. You laugh most constantly with other people. Laughter isn't primarily a response to something funny. It's primarily a social signal, the vocal expression of connection, of safety, of shared experience. The humor is often almost incidental.
And there's real structure in how the brain produces it.
Two distinct systems. Spontaneous, genuine laughter, the involuntary eruption you can't fully control, is produced by brainstem centers for emotional vocalization. It's a subcortical event coming from below the executive control system, not fully under voluntary regulation. Voluntary laughter, the performed, polite, social laughter, involves the lateral premotor cortex and supplementary motor area, the systems of deliberate motor control. Again, listeners, don't try and remember all this. And also, listeners can tell the two apart with reasonable accuracy. We know the difference between the laugh that cannot be helped and the laugh that was produced for a social purpose, and we respond to them differently.
And then there's the contagious kind, which is somewhat interesting.
It's the most interesting. When you hear someone genuinely laugh, the auditory signal activates your premotor cortex, the region that plans and prepares motor actions. Your brain is preparing to laugh before you've actually consciously decided to. A 2021 study by Billing and colleagues found that activity in a network involved in empathy and auditory-motor mirroring varies with the degree of laughter contagion. The more empathically connected you are to the person laughing, the more strongly your motor preparation system responds. And work by Caruana and Rizzolotti and their colleagues found a mirroring mechanism that maps laughter perception onto emotional laughter production. When you hear someone laugh, your brain begins to produce the neural pattern for laughing, not as imitation, but as genuine activation of the same emotional system. Laughter catches the way a yawn catches. Through a mirror system makes your brain briefly inhabit the other person's state.
And the function it serves is the part that I find most striking. Provine's argument is that laughter most likely evolved as a safety signal. Early humans laughed to tell each other that a situation was safe after a perceived threat. The shared laughter of a near miss, the laughter that breaks a tense moment, that's the safety signal doing its designed work. When two people laugh together at the same thing, they're doing something neurologically significant. They're signaling that they read the situation the same way, that they're both in safety mode rather than in threat mode. And that connection between them is genuine rather than performed. A 2025 hyperscanning study, which measures two brains at once, found that laughter specifically enhanced neural synchrony in the regions involved in social cognition and produced measurable increases in liking, prosociality, and bonding. Laughter is functional social glue, and a contagion is how the glue spreads.
Now let's look at yawning, which is the one almost everyone has wrong.
Everyone thinks they understand it. You yawn because you're tired or bored. Someone else catches it because it's somehow stimulating the same fatigue. Where does that actually break down?
It breaks down because contagious yawning doesn't follow the same pattern as spontaneous yawning. It doesn't follow the time of day variation that spontaneous yawning follows, and it's not primarily predicted by tiredness, boredom, or the hour. It's predicted by something else entirely. Most comprehensive naturalistic study came from Romero and colleagues. They tracked yawn contagion over a full year across 109 adults from 4 continents. That's pretty big. Only one variable consistently predicted whether contagion occurred, how often and how fast. Social bonding. Not tiredness, not the time of day, not gender, nationality. The rate was greatest for closest kin, then friends, then acquaintances, and finally strangers. The closer the relationship, the more reliably and quickly you catch the yawn.
Which means catching someone's yawn is an empathy signal, not necessarily a fatigue signal.
That's right, a very specific empathy signal. Both contagious laughter and contagious yawning activate the mirror neuron system, specifically the inferior frontal gyrus. Again, don't try and remember this. And both activate medial regions involved in imitation, empathy, and perspective taking. The brain catching a yawn is doing the same thing as the brain catching a laugh, briefly inhabiting that other person's state. The yawn just looks less sociable because we've misread it as fatigue rather than as an empathetic resonance.
And the fact that people suppress yawns in meetings is itself revealing. When you suppress a yawn in a professional setting, you're suppressing an empathy signal, the visible evidence that you are psychologically resonating with the person across the table. The person opposite receives less of the bonding signal that contagious yawning is designed to transmit. So the professional norm against yawning quietly reduces the visible markers of connection. You can't actually stop it. Provine showed that shielding a yawn doesn't stop its contagion. The motor action completes regardless. The only question is whether the social signal is visible.
There's a clinical prediction that follows. Reduced empathy should mean reduced yawn contagion. The evidence fits. Children below the age at which theory of mind is fully established show reduced yawn contagion. Individuals on the autism spectrum, for whom empathic attunement operates differently, show variable patterns. The yawn turns out to be a remarkably sensitive indicator of the empathic circuitry. You can control what you say. You've considerably less control over what you catch.
Now the largest scale of this, and the one with the most practical weight, emotional contagion, the spreading of mood and affect between people.
Formal research begins with Hatfield, Cacioppo, and Rapson, whose 1993 paper defined emotional contagion as the tendency to automatically mimic and synchronize expressions, vocalizations, postures, and movements with another person, and consequently to converge emotionally. The mechanism is the same as for laughter and yawning. The motor mimicry system produces a brief physiological matching of the other person's state, and that matching generates the emotional experience. You don't feel sad because you've reasoned your way into empathy with a sad person. You feel sad because your body has briefly taken on the posture, the facial expression, and the vocal quality of sadness. And the body then feeds that back to the brain, which produces the emotion. Their emotional contagion scale captures individual differences in susceptibility, and those differences are large. Some people catch moods readily and strongly. Others are considered more buffered.
And the speed is the part that surprises people. It happens below conscious awareness faster than deliberate processing. You've caught the mood before you've formed any conscious assessment of what mood the other person is in. The face changes, the posture shifts, the vocal tone modulates. all in milliseconds. By the time you consciously register that a colleague seems anxious today, your own state has already begun to shift. The cognitive assessment is downstream of the contagion. The catching is faster than the noticing.
Sigal Balsaid at Wharton produced one of the most important studies of this in organizational settings. In a 2002 paper, she showed that group emotional contagion influences key group outcomes. The degree of cooperation and conflict, task performance, and the subjective quality of their working environment. What one person brings into a meeting, their anxiety, enthusiasm, irritability, energy, it all spreads to the group throughout the contagion mechanism, and that spread shapes the quality of their work. Not through persuasion or argument, through automatic physiological mimicry that everyone in the room is engaged in continuously without even knowing it.
And the leader dimension is where this gets most consequential for us. Research by Tsai and colleagues found that leaders cause emotional contagion in their followers at a scale far out of proportion to their numbers. A leader's state spreads through the team more effectively than the same state from a non-leader. The mechanism is attention. We attend to leaders more than to peers, and sustained attention to someone's expressions, posture, and vocal quality produces stronger and faster contagion than casual exposure. The leader who walks in carrying suppressed anxiety has already transmitted it to the room before the meeting starts. Not through anything said, through the micro-expressions, postural signals, and vocal qualities the anxiety is producing beneath the deliberate communication.
It even extends into digital environments as well. Kramer, Guillory, and Hancock in 2014 showed that emotional contagion occurs through social media, even without face-to-face interaction. Seeing more positive content produce more positive posts. Seeing more negative content, guess what? Produce more negative posts. The study was ethically controversial because it manipulated users' feeds without their knowledge. But the finding is consistent with the broader literature. You don't need to be in the same room. You need to be exposed to the person's emotional signals. The contagion follows the signal wherever it travels.
Which raises the obvious question, does everyone catch it equally? Because the susceptibility research says no.
Not equally at all, and the personal threat and reward profile framework maps onto the differences precisely. The participation driver is the most directly relevant. It monitors belonging, relational safety, and the quality of social connection. And it does that partly through exactly the physiological attunement Hatfield describes. A person with a highly sensitive participation driver is, by design, more attuned to the emotional signals around them. Their mirror system is more active in social environments. They catch more, they catch faster, and they're more effective by what they catch. That's both the gift and the vulnerability of high participation sensitivity. The same attunement that makes them effective relational connectors makes them more susceptible to the emotional weather of the rooms that they're in.
And the protection driver sits on the other side of it, on the transmission side rather than the reception side.
Exactly. A person with a highly sensitive protection driver who's in threat mode, whose status feels under pressure, whose competence feels questioned, is broadcasting specific physiological signals. Elevated cortisol, increased stress response activation, micro-expressions of defensive vigilance. Those signals are caught by everyone attending to them. The leader whose protection driver is activated by a difficult board meeting, for example, transmits stress signal to every person in the room. And the team members with high participation sensitivity catch it most strongly. The protection driver's stress is amplified by the participation driver's reception. That is the mechanism beneath the observation that anxious leaders create anxious teams, not through what they say, but through what they transmit, even before a word is spoken.
So, what do we do with all of this? 3 things. First, if you lead, take your own physiological state seriously as a leadership variable, not just a personal matter. What you bring into the room is the emotional weather of the room for everyone in it. The preparation for a leadership meeting should include the preparation of the state of the person leading it, not only the content. Second, if you're a coach, your state is always being transmitted to the client. Walking into a session distracted, anxious, or depleted isn't a neutral presence. The contagion has already communicated it before the conversation starts. Coaching presence isn't a soft aspiration, it's a neurological requirement.
Thirdly, design environments that support positive contagion. Laughter research tells us that shared, genuine laughter synchronizes brains, builds bonds, reduces threat activation, and transmits safety. A meeting culture that allows no laughter, no warmth, no genuine playfulness is suppressing one of the most efficient social bonding mechanisms available. The contagion that spreads from a genuinely funny, warm, generous moment in a team meeting does more for cohesion, trust, and performance than most team-building interventions ever devised.
So, Phil, what's the single most important thing from this episode, in your opinion?
Convoluted sentence, but you are never not transmitting. Every moment you're in the presence of another person, your body is broadcasting your emotional state through your facial expressions, your posture, your vocal quality, and the microsignals of your physiological activation. And every person in that room is catching those signals automatically, without deliberate attention, faster than conscious reasoning. The question is never whether emotional contagion is happening. The question is only what you are spreading. The leader who thinks their anxiety is well concealed is completely wrong. The coach who thinks their distraction is professional is wrong. The colleague who thinks their irritability is contained, that's wrong too. The body is transmitting. The mirror system is receiving, and the prefrontal cortex, especially at 2 p.m, is doing slightly less to moderate the reception than we might like to think. You can't opt out of contagion. You can only choose, with more or less deliberateness, what you're giving people to catch.
And key references are in our show notes. And a personal observation, this episode was recorded in the morning.
It was recorded in the morning. We'd like to think we made almost no mistakes. And we didn't laugh once until just right now, which is either evidence for the research or evidence that the research applies to everyone, maybe except us.
Thank you for spending time with us today, BrainWise friends. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay BrainWise.